Hey Bonnie, good. You're on mute, but I hear you. I see you. You're good. Just waiting for everybody to
There
join.
we go.
There we go.
Do you guys ever use Teams?
That's all we use. I think we were using Zoom for this process
Yeah.
because it's easier for when you have people from the outside joining in. But
Yeah, same with us.
yeah.
We're struggling with it. They're not letting us use WebEx anymore. So
Oh, really?
yeah, so now they want us moving all to Teams. And it's like for those of us that work off campus a lot, our partners can't easily access Teams.
Right. That's
So trying to figure out if there's another state agency having success with figuring out Teams.
right. Yeah. We use Teams, but yeah, when we have these more public type, yeah, we have to use Zoom. Hey,
Yeah.
Martin.
Hi there. Bonnie, did you have to register to get in?
Yes, I did.
Okay, it wasn't supposed to be that way, so I guess everyone's going to have a problem because that's why invite got sent out to everybody. I didn't think everyone would have to register.
I just plowed right through it and
I
popped
know
up.
it was simple, but
Yeah.
it's another step that wasn't supposed to happen because I went to log in and it was like, wait a minute, we have the link and then even the meeting password using that, it made me register and it was like,
Hmm.
I guess we didn't get it set up right, so apologies.
No problem.
So we may have a little delay of people getting in if they have to, because they have to register, which wasn't intended.
Martin, do you want me to share anything?
Hopefully I have permissions to share because I have the stuff that I've got to share, but
I mean, Martin, it was when you click right on the link that you sent out that it goes right to the registration. You just
I
gotta, I
know,
guess, log
yeah, I
in.
know, but that was just kind of wasn't supposed to happen that way, and I don't know why it's just a glitch. But I can see everyone registering coming in now, so it's and just we're just waiting for everyone to get signed in. Fortunately, there was a little glitch and thought everyone was going to be able to be entered automatically in, but when you click the link, you had to register. So apologies for the extra step today. We'll get started in about another minute here, just getting everyone else logged in and just verifying everyone that's here. So. Okay, I think we've got everybody in. We're recording. So good afternoon, everybody. Martin Heft, Undersecretary, Office of Policy and Management. And Commissioner Brian Hobart is here, Department of Agriculture. We'll call our meeting to order at 1:05. Apologies for the sign in this afternoon. We thought we had eliminated it, so you'd be able to just join directly. So apologies for having to register last minute and get that process in. So thus a little bit of delay. Just wanted to start out. Obviously, just a couple little housekeeping things for those aren't familiar with with the Zoom and everything else that we do have. If you want to speak, there is a to raise your hand in that, or wave if we can see your picture on here and everything. We'll do that so that way we can make sure everybody gets recognized. If you click on the participants at the bottom of the screen, you'll see everyone that is here, including any guests. So we're not going to go around and say who's all in here, because we do have attendance right online here for us. So with that, we're going to get started. We'll do a couple of just little opening remarks from myself and the commissioner. So I kind of already went through the virtual meeting etiquette, if you will. Appreciate that if you can be on screen, video wise as you're speaking, that would be great. Today's meeting will focus on the valuation recommendations, along with the review of the approved recommendations that we've done doing, by the survey that was sent out. We've compiled all those responses and we'll go through those. Those were attached to the meeting invite, so you have those. We'll also send it out after this meeting as well as part of the meeting notes. And then I know we'll go into discussion once we go through and complete that. With the next steps will be to broaden each of those that we are looking forward to recommend in order to present those to the public before we make any final recommendations. So we'll be talking about that process after we kind of get through all of those pieces. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Hobart for any remarks.
Thank you, Undersecretary. I have to appreciate everybody joining us today. I hope the virtual option this afternoon still worked with everybody's schedule, and appreciate the time that everybody continues to contribute to this. And I want to acknowledge the work that went in by the members between the last meeting and today to do some additional surveying regarding some of the recommendations that have been presented to this group, or from this group. To actually both to this group and from this group, because we've had a number of folks from the public generate some. The governor charged us with recommending alternative measures to improve data collection, review, and valuation processes consistent with state law, and I think we're cranking away at that responsibility that we have been given. So I'm looking forward to today's continued conversation and more discussion around that. And the last thing I will add is that one of the bills that passed during this most recent legislative session and was recently signed into law by the governor did reinstate the 2025 land use values for forest land until October 1st, 2030. So the forest land rates are going to go back to what the recommendations were from October, recognizing that they were a little out of alignment with some of the other recommendations that we had. So for awareness to everybody, if you did not know that passed, that was included in what we have termed the Connecticut Farm Bill. So Undersecretary, I don't have anything else to add. Just looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Terrific. Thank you, Commissioner, for the update there. And I know we've talked, about forest land kind of separately and the way that's valued separately than farmland and everything else. So understand, that legislative piece that went through. So hopefully what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up a document which is in the packet. Hopefully my share screen will work here. So okay, which everyone should be able to see now.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So these were the recommendations, and I'm really just going to concentrate on the first page because the second piece will show up in the survey. These were the pieces that were done at our last meeting and what we voted on at that meeting by consensus. So we had the two categories, the land and reporting pieces, and then we're going to go into the valuation today from the survey. So on the land side, we voted, two things. One, about simplifying, reducing the land classifications, similar to like a five class or less model tiered approach. And then secondly, to reduce the land classifications by removing River Valley and just having statewide. So we have those two recommendations. Simply as we try to, the second one, very easy because we would just remove the River Valley and only have statewide. The first one would be coming up with what those classes would be. We've talked about some at the last meeting. We'll get into that a little bit later in today's meeting. And then on the reporting side, we discussed the three different ones here about, mandatory annual reporting, requiring lease rental agreements at the time of application or renewal for full compliance, and creating a statewide contact database. If you recall, after, kind of all the discussion on that, some stuff kind of got rolled into one. And what we voted on was to create a mandated reporting through the town for data, voted against establishing any annual reporting that would maintain the status of the land. So those are kind of the two things that we took away from this, is that we wanted to have some sort of reporting through the town, through the municipality, to collect the data that we needed, but we didn't want it, a statutorily thing of an annual reporting that they were required or anything else. So those were what was discussed at the last meeting that we did there. Does anyone have any questions on those? That's kind of just a recap of the last meeting that was sent out and everything. So just stop sharing that just in case I can see any hands or anything. Okay. And let me then just bear with me as I'm calling up the other screens here so we can do this. So the next piece what I want to do is go through the valuation survey that we sent out. I'm going to appreciate everyone getting, stuff back and everything. Haven't had a chance to look at it again. It is attached to today's meeting invites. It's also on the shared drive. We'll get it out, as part of the minute notes as well on here. And what we've done is taken all the responses. So, no state agencies are included in the responses of this. So, DEEP, DOAG, or OPM did not participate in the survey. We don't have any of us in here because this is obviously we're the facilitator side, and we want this to be the working group, information here and recommendations that are going to come back to the state agencies and the governor's office. So we took each of the things, the first part was ranking the importance to adopt 490 working group, a 5 is a high and a 1 is a low. We took, the chart, and I'll, as you look at it, and I'll call it up in a moment, 1 through 5, took how many people voted on each one of those, and did the same for the difficulty of implementing the ranking, the 3 to the 1, and also put, where the total votes are there. So that way we can see how many, voted for each one of those. And if you look at the ranking sheet, kind of the midway, the 3 is kind of, in between, as we know. So we're looking, adding either the first 2 numbers or the last 2 numbers to kind of look at what the consensus vote is on these. So that's what we'll do, and we'll kind of go through, and then we kind of, by that, have come up with what the consensus vote would be. Obviously up for discussion. This is just, based upon, the survey results we have here. So let me share this screen and we'll run through this process, and everyone can see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm working on 2 screens here, so if you see my head keep turning, it's because I'm looking at the other screen to review this. So the first recommendation was update valuation methods to reflect true and operating cost and agricultural profit. As you can see, and I'll kind of explain, once again, the ranking, on it, where the 1 being the low, the 5 being the high. And then obviously the vote column is where you submitted the survey results in. So this one here showed that the majority, 11, showed that this was low priority. And it was also difficulty in implementing was also on the high side. So by this ranking, being a low priority, we'd say no consensus. This is a no consensus as a recommendation, for us to move forward. Does that make sense to everybody, how I kind of went through this process? Or any questions on that? Okay. And if anyone sees something different, or has opinion, on it, just come up with that. We tried to come up with a, kind of a slight methodology of looking at this, of just determining, the numbers. The second one, implement flat statewide valuation rates for farmland by classification. Obviously, this one, there was higher priority. There was 9 on that versus 3, by the top. And then they thought difficulty, was low, with an 8. You can kind of see a little pattern here where, at least on the top, and you'll see this pattern going through that I looked at, where those that were kind of voted low priority also were difficulty in implementing, higher difficulty in implementing. So I thought you can kind of see that now with the second one, where it's like, oh, high priority. Oh, and this will be an easier one to implement, at least by, the survey piece here. So this one would be a yes, that we would look at making this a recommendation. And then the number 10 on the bottom here, implement a flat tax rate per acre for farmland across the state. This one was, voted low priority. Also, the difficulty was also low on that one as well. So that one's a little bit off from the other, but being a low priority, it was a no for, moving this one forward. And the ID numbers on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that they'll go out of order, but they're just following what our original one was, where we shifted a couple of items around and added a couple in. So if you see them go out of order, it's just to match up to our original sheet, so we can plug these back in after onto our original sheet that I had shown in the first screen share. So number 11, implement a flat tax rate per acre per classification of farmland across the state. This again was a a high at 8, and they thought it would be low to implement, so that was a recommendation to move forward with. Implement mill rate caps for farmland. Again, that was it was a close. It was 7 to 5, but still consensus wise, and it was kind of in the middle about difficulty in implementing on that. So that was a recommendation to move forward with. Obviously, all of these that are yeses would be ones we'd have to broaden, and that will be the next steps on here. The next one, 13, use 5-year averages, dropping outliers of produce price index for valuation calculations instead of rental surveys, and adjust the valuations every 5 years. This one was, again, low priority. Thought it was more difficult to implement. So this was a no on moving forward with this one. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to keep going. But if I miss someone, please just, shout out. Yes, Kim.
Hey, Martin. Hi, guys. Sorry, I missed the last couple of meetings due to some farming that we needed to get done. But I was, and I think it's production price index, correct? Not producer price index. It should be, but was this? I wasn't quite sure about this one. Like, is this based on the USDA PPI? So it's kind of, what I thought when I saw this was this was based more on kind of commercial, commodity agriculture, which isn't really a good, measure for the state of Connecticut, which is really more small, diversified, direct to consumer farms, and of course, this is just talking about the farmland, not open space and the other categories in there. But is that what I was understanding that to be?
So
this is a USDA, data.
Sure. So I'm going to call on Keith, because this was his recommendation originally, back from the original piece, just to elaborate on that, which is why I have my handy sheet here separate that tells me who the source was of it, so we can, for any piece there. So Keith?
Yeah, no, thank you, Martin. That is the producer price index that is published by our fine and dandy federal government.
Right.
It does not directly relate to agriculture, but does include agriculture. I struggled to find anything that then would relate to, agriculture itself, but that is really not available. And this is the closest thing that I found in my putting this recommendation forth, as far as something to hang our hat on that would be uniform, would be not within what typically should remain as available to us without any heavy lifting.
Yeah, I think the challenges I found with this survey was really understanding how then we are going to evaluate accurately, or at least, Connecticut working farmland. the value of working farmland in the state, so that it's affordable to farmers to farm. And of course, again, I realize that's only one component of PA 490, but it's kind of I think the topic of obviously with what was recently passed on the dairy side, clearly there's these are the challenges that we had going into this was, how do we afford taxes if the costs of farming are so high? So, how do we really evaluate the value of per acre farmland? I'm still not really sure if we've achieved that in this document, but I'm pleased to see some things that I think are going to help, like these 11 and 12, certainly.
Yeah, so just quick response back there. So this would apply to our base that we pick, and then deleting or eliminating the outliers helps to make it stable. And when we're starting, hopefully, which I think will be a very reasonable ag value, the implication of a percentage change that is in the 3 to 5% range would then not be a negligible, substantial increase to hurt farmers either. So that's where I come back at that part of it. Definitely, there may be other ones here or further research might find to do it, but that's what I came up with on my straw man stuff a couple meetings ago.
Yeah, I saw that. That was well put together. Thank you.
Yeah, and Kim, and for others, because I should have mentioned this as a recap as well. As those know, when we started reviewing all of these, we looked at these as concept recommendations. So they're not, well, that's the next step, is to broaden those and, okay, how do we then do this piece? On it. So that's not part of the survey. It was more, do we like this concept moving forward as a recommendation or not? And then we elaborate on those concepts that we want to move forward with, not waste time on the ones that we don't want to. So that was kind of the piece there for the way the survey was done up. So
and certainly, Keith, I think it is valuable to, and I don't know, again, the conversation around that, but it is valuable, I would assume, to have some kind of baseline, to average to in this process, while we potentially build our own data statewide with those forms that people are filling out, and start building that database in lieu of having that immediately available. Certainly having some kind of existing, baseline PPI to look at, I think is valuable. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, great. Thanks. So the next one is very similar, but there was just a couple of things. And this one is use rolling 5-year averages of producer price index for valuation calculations instead of rental surveys, but adjust the valuations more often than 5 years, typically annually. But this one as well was voted, no, as well. Next one, adopt income capitalization of net farm income for valuation. This one was also voted no, as you can see, 12 to 0, really, on that one there. Implementing an annual growth cap. This one was voted yes to move forward with. I'm, on a 8 to 3 on it with a medium implementation piece. Then we have adopt incentive-based models rewarding production and farm work. For example, credits, income ties, to discourage fallow land or productive soils. This one was voted no to move forward with this one here. Then we had apply size-based tiering for very large land blocks, i.e. 50 acres. This one was voted no as well to move forward with. Implement single flat statewide farmland classifications and value. And this one was voted no to move forward with additionally. These are our numbers go back because we shifted a couple of these from earlier. Maintain forest land valuation by existing by DEEP based upon regional stumpage valuation requiring a forest management plan. This one was, a yes on that, and Commissioner already mentioned, part of that in his opening remarks as well, and our comments on that piece there. Then we had
Hey, Martin,
yes.
Joe Orfici has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thanks. Just on that one, I wasn't clear when it said require a forest management plan. Is that, maybe it's something we can talk about later, so don't let me delay you, but is that talking about a new regulation, like we asked forest owners to have a management plan? Or is that perhaps intending to mean the current system, which is the qualified foresters report, which is just a lesser level than a management plan? And maybe if people have an opinion on one or the other, maybe that's something we need to discuss further, but I wasn't clear on that, and I have an opinion.
Yep. So as we said, these are overall recommendations, then we have to broaden them, but let me just see if I have,
And if you want to talk about it later, that's fine too, but I think that's a point we should really note to be specific in talking about.
yep, nope, that's fine. I just want to see where the, I've just got to look up to see where kind of the, had come from. Do. If anyone recalls who popped that in there, then I'm trying to find it on my other listing, so apologies.
I fear it's something I could have discussed, but not.
It could have been, but
not
obviously,
recommended
yeah.
the management plan. Anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but we can come back. I'm
I
sorry.
don't see it explicit with a management plan in there, but it did, I think, in the transfer from your spreadsheet, Martin, to the one that Keith put together, it ended up on there.
Okay.
So I don't know that anybody's to blame if it's just a translation, but I think to your point, Martin, Joe, I think we can talk about this
Right.
when we dig in a little bit deeper about what exactly should or should anything be required.
Right.
Yeah, great.
No, thanks. Yeah.
I'll just throw in, because I did mention that during my presentation. I think, should we be looking at what forest land size is these days compared to what it used to be? And is there a case to be made for assisting in lower than 25 acres to be eligible for something? So I think that's where I threw that out. And again, future discussion here.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Keith and Joe, for both comments there. So then the second piece of that was a multi-tiered forest land valuation, 25 plus acres as existing, and new 10 to 25 acres, saying at the same rate per acre as a town's open space classification. This was voted no against that piece there. So kind of maintaining forest as existing that we do now. Overall. Bottom of that page, maintain current practice with enhanced improvement reporting processes. That was a yes, 10 to 4, currently keep with what we're doing, but enhance, all of our reporting processes. And that was discussed at, the last meeting to make sure we added that into this process. Then one was replace the survey-based valuation with a formula based on like soil productivity model. This was voted about no, not to recommend this. And then the last was about establishing a regional agricultural commissioner body. Very close. I mean, it was 6 to 5, but just based upon, consensus, this would be a no to, move forward with this. Obviously, any of these can be, we'll obviously discuss as we go back through these that we've done, with yeses here on that, and kind of talk about some next steps. But what I want to do, does anyone have any questions on what I just kind of presented here before we kind of moved to some of the next steps? Yes, Kim.
Yeah, sorry. The agricultural committee. I mean, I feel like that's worth further discussion personally. I think, again, it was put into the recent bill with the dairy farmers, and I think for good reason. It's the reason that brought us all here is that there's a advisory or review each year, kind of, to help inform and enlighten and make sure that, we're keeping, our agricultural land viable. And in order to do that, I think it's important to get input from the various, factions within agriculture, forestry, open space. Forestry I know is moved back to deep, so that's kind of their discussion. But that's my feelings, and I'd love to just kind of hear what others think about that. Because I apologize, I don't know if that was part of a wider discussion in the last meeting. But if there's anyone that can just kind of give me their feedback on that, I'd be interested.
Yeah, I all I can tell you, Kim, I know this recommendation came from you on here, and some of the other ones where, just so you know, they weren't included in the survey because they were outside of the scope of what our group is. Everyone was given those, so everyone, saw those on here. We felt this one because, knowing other states have a board that oversees the valuation piece of it there. So that was the way it was discussed, was that format there, not similar to, the way the group is, that's the new group that's being done, because that's looking at a whole lot of things. Our charge is only on valuation, and that process. So if we want to look at, so it was kind of discussed as, we want to look at what Vermont does, or Maine. I forgot which states have it, but a couple of them do have a board that actually gets together more than just one agency for that. That was the way it was is explained as the purpose of that one for, for the survey piece. So hopefully that helps. And if I've misinterpreted anything, but that's what my memory is from, previous meeting that we discussed on that one there. But other people's thoughts on it and everything, obviously, that's why we're all here.
Yeah, and Martin, just one point to
Yeah, John.
that. There's already and you might be familiar with it, the Farmland Preservation Advisory Board set up by the state. And I'm just wondering if something that we're discussing with PA 490 could be put under their purview.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that food for thought that we can obviously add into, any notes and anything else. Yes. All right, I'm just typing that as a note to myself for a minute.
I'll just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
If we end up talking flat rate or however the rates get set, I'm super interested in chatting about the idea of a advisory board every 5 years, to review the rates or something along those lines, or provide input. So, I don't think we rule that conversation out by any means, right? Depending on how we think about reevaluations, a board could be a way of doing that.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Any other comments?
I was just going to add,
Go ahead,
given
Jenny.
the fact that this vote was very similar, right? So this could have gone either direction. I do think that having farmers at the table in a discussion is important, whether they have a powerful voice is, not to be determined here, but I think that anytime we can have, the players that it impacts come together to work with state agencies to perhaps influence decisions is something that we should consider.
Yeah.
Keith, I'll
Good
just
point.
quickly
Yes.
chime in here. I would again opine that some stability in a group like that would be worthwhile. I know maybe Bonnie knows even more here, but past history supposedly is that values that were then updated had some statistical evaluation pieces of it, but then there was also group consensus over how those things stayed together, going back decades plus here on what came out for 490 values, and that they weren't down to the nickels and dimes per acre. So
No, Keith, I
Bonnie.
think Keith, it is important. And I think that historically there has been, and, Farm Bureau always sat at the table. I know when I worked there that we worked with OPM and Department of Ag just to make sure that our, the farmers, as Jenny said, do have a voice. And as Kim has said, it's important. And there's any number of boards, and Commissioner Herbert, I would leave that up to you. You've got any number of boards that could wrap your hands around where that could slot in versus having to legislate for another board, potentially to be seated to work with this. So I guess I would leave it, Commissioner, up to you to see. And again, I agree with the concept that we've got the Farmland Preservation Board, you've got the Governor's Council. I don't know where that is right now, Brian, but there's certain places where an advisory committee could be part of something that's already legislated.
I'll just share, I think this said regional agricultural commissioner body, which would require legislation to then develop in statute the body, how the votes are taken, et cetera. An advisory committee and ad hoc committee is a lot easier to convene. And certainly through this process, we've learned a lot, and that's something that's on the table. I'd be careful about extending the charge of any boards, councils, or commissions, because that would have to go through the legislature for approval. But the opportunity to convene a group is that doesn't require legislation and can be done just through practice as opposed to statute.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's good point as well there, as we're looking, some of this, and it was discussed at the previous meeting. We did not go through it with this, of which things might require legislative action and which things do not. So I apologize on that we didn't kind of hit base on those, but we can go back as we're going through looking at these that we're recommending, if it's a legislative proposal or if it's going to be one that can just be implemented. So that was another factor we have to look at as we go through our next steps on here. Any other comments? I know we're kind of talking about the advisory board, so let's finish talking about that piece there. Anything else on that topic? Okay, I'm not seeing anything there. Okay. So kind of as we're looking here, is what we've now have is a listing of recommendations that, by consensus that we've come up with, which are more, if you will, general in terms. We have to kind of expand those. What do we mean by this now? As we talked about, the simple one, removing River Valley. Okay, boom, that's a one-liner, very simple, because it's, we'll only have statewide land values, or recommend, that. Other one is coming up with land classifications. Well, what do we do those? I know we've talked about prime, non-prime. We've talked about, I forgot some of the other terms that were mentioned, but they're all in our notes and everything. What we need to do next is expand those. And we have, now our list of, consensus recommendations on here. And it's not to say, when we kind of come up with a final report, we could say, have at the end, these were other things considered but not voted on by consensus, so we could include those so they're available. More than, that's up to the group. I'll note that, the commissioners, my role here, obviously is facilitate all of this, for you to be able to get, this information back. So one of the things that has to happen now as, working group members is to develop these final recommendations. And then we have to create a presentation for the public that we can do. It can be what the recommendations are and everything else on that. And then after that is all done, we would come back, hearing any public comments, anything else, and finalize, our report and our recommendations. And I say our, meaning the working group, recommendations that would then get forwarded back to, the governor's office, in both the OPM and DOAG as well. So for that. So, with that, this is where some, work comes in from, the working group members. It's not proper for us as the state agencies to start, to draft up the recommendations that you'll ultimately be sending to us. For this, we're trying to help facilitate this. So we're going to be looking for some people to, start elaborating on some of these, or whether some smaller groups want to take on, here's the reporting and here's the, the land piece, and then we'll take on the revaluation pieces. A number of you have done some great work already, presentations that you've given to us, some, background on a lot of this. So we have a lot of that information. It's just starting to put it together into, kind of a presentation form and everything. Our goal is by the, on the 23rd is to try to have all that together for all of us to review. And then if we're ready at that point, like if we're all in consensus, okay, we're good with this, with the language, everything, we would hold a public presentation meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for July 14th. It'd be a virtual. And then we'd have another meeting after that to, finalize, the working group's work and recommendations. If we're not ready on the 23rd, we would use the 14th as another working group meeting to get everything finalized, on that. So that's kind of what the plan is, that we're looking at to move this piece forward. Commissioner, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that. I know you and I touched base the other day just about, moving forward process and everything. So.
No, I appreciate what you said, Martin. I think there's a lot there, and I think it's important that we build these out reflective of a working group. And so, if people could volunteer to participate, and I don't know if we want to break these down into 2 or 3 buckets, or if people want to tackle it as a whole. But I think that'll be really, really important for us to communicate to the public as to how these recommendations came about.
Great. So I want to turn it over to our working group members for, thoughts, suggestions, volunteers, what ways you would like to see, this to get compiled together. Joe?
I mean, I'd love to address the forest land part just up front because maybe it's the least controversial, and I kind of expect possibly we keep it the same as it was. Maybe not, but maybe we can hit that one first. It's also the one that has the implications on the most acres and the most people.
Yep. And Joe, just so you know, that was our one where we voted to, where were we? Sorry. Yeah, about keeping the same valuation process and everything that way. We just have to kind of more determine on the, what did we mention in there? This forest management plan, piece there.
Yeah, and if it's helpful, I could give a rundown of, I mean, I'm a qualified forester for that.
Yeah.
I could, when we're ready, I can give a rundown of the current process if people want.
Okay. Bonnie?
Martin, I guess one of the questions I would have would be for Chris in terms of, do you see any concerns with just moving forward straight away as Joe was described? Or are there any things that you're concerned with?
Thanks, Bonnie. We've been pretty comfortable, I think, from the get-go with the way forest land has been evaluated and the criteria and the steps that forest landowners need to take. It's purposely easy to get in because we want people to manage their land. And they are introduced, as Joe said, to a qualified forester at the onset of their enrollment. And so the opportunity to have a conversation with a professional The application does include an evaluation of the forest, an inventory, forest stand maps, some very brief recommendations, all in the hopes of maybe starting a relationship with a professional moving forward. At the same point, though, we're not mandating anyone to manage their forest. We certainly encourage it because there's a lot of forest health issues out there. But that in and of itself, I think, makes the program attractive. And you'll see that reflected in the amount of acres that are enrolled in the state. It is the biggest classification. There has been other discussions about having a different tier, a stewardship forest tier, which would then require a more robust forest management plan, compliance with the management plan, but in turn would have a further reduction in assessed acres because the landowner was going to be more heavily invested in their forest's health. It gets a little tricky, especially with the most recent valuation of $200 per acre. How do you further incentivize someone to actively manage when the value of their woods is already that low? And what kind of pushback would the assessors have on that? So, I think that would take a legislative step also, a little bit out of the scope here. But certainly a lot of the discussions we've had on forest land are discussions we've had before. And I'm feeling very good about the outcome of this working group's recommendation on keeping things the way they are. But yet, if there's an opportunity for additional discussion to make improvements that go beyond this working group scope, happy to do that.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Bonnie, for the follow-up there. Okay. Others?
John has his hand up, Martin.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want actually a comment and a question. And Commissioner, I think this might go along with you too. One of my top priorities was the contact list and having DOAG and OPM create this one consistent template that has relevant, important contact information, sort of like what had been missing over the past couple of revaluations. And the charge would be that template would go to local assessors, and local assessors would manage that with updating the 490 information. And then subsequently, when the reval comes from DOAG, they submit that latest information to DOAG in this one consistent template. If we go along with that route, or whatever conversation we have about recommendations, what if local assessors push back and don't want to follow something that we're recommending?
Well, I think if we're going to make any sort of reporting, mandated, it would be a legislative piece.
Okay.
It would have to be a legislative piece, rather than voluntarily. And that was, previously discussed. So that would be a legislative, recommendation, to that this reporting needs to be, it's required as part of, whether it be part of the M28 or, whatever, that this would be ported there, because we did vote to create that mandated reporting, which is a legislative, piece.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
And in that instance, John, the assessors would have the opportunity through the legislative process to attend public hearings and express their concerns, and the legislature would have to determine, where they wanted to land on it.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So and then I think
Jenny had her hand up.
Right. I was going to say, I just saw that, but I just wanted to make one note, because I'm trying to keep, as people are making certain comments, I'm creating a couple little bucket lists, of where, thinking that we may be able to fit each of you into, to work on certain things, such as, Joe and, Chris and Martin and Dave Beers to look at the forestry section and write that up. John, maybe have you work on the reporting piece, with whoever else, possibly. I think Fran was originally with you doing some of that, to kind of work on the reporting piece, of this type of thing. And if we kind of start creating these little buckets this way, we can get through, some of these evaluation pieces will become a little bit more on that. So just wanted to note that. Jenny, and then Bill Lee.
Thanks. So we have spent the last several months kind of like going in a big circle. And I want to point out that we are essentially 3 hours. So the remainder of this session plus one more before we have to put together final recommendations. And I keep coming back to our original ask by the governor to look at our survey process and how we got to this place. And that was something that this group said that they wanted to continue to look at the current system of a survey and move forward. And I feel that there's a lot to unpack there with 3 hours remaining. So, and I think it's really critical. I think that we can do a lot of fixes in that area and get a better survey. I know that when I submitted my rating scale, I made a point to mention that, when we look at a survey and we threw out $0 or barters, that is a value. We neglected a very big part of $0 while there's no money exchanging hands. That is a value. That is a value that a farmer is willing to pay to produce something on agricultural land. So I'm willing to help with this portion of it. Clearly, I'm very passionate about it. I think that this is where we should have spent a lot of our energy from the get-go, was surrounding the survey questions and what was thrown out and not thrown out, and how do we keep questions so that we are getting reflective information across our state. Because I do stand firm that 0 is a value, even though it's not, $500 per acre. 0 is a value per acre. So more of a statement. I'm happy to help in any capacity on any one of these questions. I'm in it until the end. And so happy to work offline with whoever else wants to join me.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. And just, reiterate that, tentative plan is the 3 hours, if you will. But, if we need more time, obviously we're going to take it. We're not going to streamline it and cut anybody off. So, Bill Lee.
Afternoon. I just had, a follow-up or a point of clarification for John's comment. So what exactly, in terms of reporting from the assessors, what exactly are we looking for, or would we be looking for? Are we looking for assessors to compile the rental information that was previously done through the Yukon surveys, or what exactly are you looking for in terms of reporting?
Well, this was just the process, Bill. I think one of the big gaps with the latest process was that DOAG and OPM didn't have the updated ownership. They didn't have contact information, where to send the survey or who to contact with. And I think if there's a contact list developed that the assessors can manage, not necessarily leasing information, we haven't discussed that or anything. It's just the parcels in their town, who owns them and how to contact those owners. If we wanted to expand it to rental information or anything like that, that's up for discussion. But my thing was contact information.
Right. And I think
I can say in Rocky Hill, I can say, for example, we have 10 farms with probably 30 or 40 490 owners. So we would compile the contact information for the 30 or 40 parcels, with a subsection probably for the farmers that are leasing some of that land. But in the end, it should be the most updated information sent back to DOAG and OPM for the revaluation.
Yeah, and I don't think you'd get any pushback I can only speak for myself, not on behalf of 169, but I don't think you'd get any pushback from getting ownership and mailing addresses.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't anticipate that being an issue.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bill and John. Other thoughts? Comments? So currently I've got only 3 buckets that I've kind of put people in right now. I already mentioned the forest, for Joe, Chris, and David reporting, John and Fran. Bill Lee, would you be interested in doing reporting too, just on for the assessor side?
That'd be fine. Sure.
Okay. And I know, Jenny, I appreciate that if you would kind of work on the current system of improvements, that piece there, and anyone else that wants to work with her on that piece. And then we've got, obviously some of the evaluation ones that we went through here that we have to, expand upon, going through the flat statewide valuation rates, flat tax rate per acre, mill rate cap, which would be legislative, annual growth cap. And some of these are just, focusing out a little bit more. Forest land, we already talked about the current practices. So really there's only, those few that are the valuation ones, on that. I know, Keith, I know you worked on a lot of this, popping this together, and done some great work on the, the presentation stuff. So I know we're going to tap on you a little bit, through this. Ella?
I'll volunteer for the annual cap. That sounds nerdy and economic. I'll look at data.
Okay, on the valuation stuff you were talking about, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ella.
Hi, sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand on this.
Oh, that's okay. No, I'm trying to look for your way. I can only see so many people. It's okay.
No, that's okay. I don't mean to interrupt. I've been searching and I can't seem to find that. So
that's okay.
Anyway, I wanted to kind of reiterate to what Jenny said, and I in the work, a lot of the work that I do, we have these sort of working charrettes where, we've got stickies and Post-it notes and we're really getting deep and granular into the details. And I do feel like we've touched on a lot of these things. And I feel like we've come to a really great place on some things, but like she said, the meat of what we're here to do is to kind of figure out like how to assess and how to survey. I really am a firm believer in the value of having data and being able to run queries in this day and age, to sort of, do this survey every 5 years where we're asking a handful of people that, this sort of long-winded questions versus asking a lot of people, maybe fewer questions, and getting some real data on what is the state of farming that we can call up and also can help to serve not just PA 490, but can serve other areas within agricultural viability. But as it serves this, I think it gives us a real picture of, what are the costs, what are the inputs, that farmers are facing? How do we make sure that they're viable, and how that we're assessing that land to ensure that they can afford to farm it? And so I do feel, and I agree with her, that 3 hours is a little, it's making me nervous because I feel like we still haven't gotten to the meat of what is needed in this. And that's to figure out how to, what data are we looking for from PA 490 folks, and how do we get that? Is that a database system that is built by the state that we all plug into every year? I know we said we didn't want to do the every year. I don't know why, but to me, it's the more data that we can start building, the better equipped we will be to, whether we have an advisory team or it's Brian and his team calling up information. That is, to me, the crux of this. We need the data to know what we're actually dealing with, so we're not taking shots in the dark. And I feel like at this stage, maybe we all need to schedule a longer day, get in a room and do a legitimate charrette and break these things down on a more granular level and make some decisions in the moment, versus breakout groups getting together. And it's really hard to kind of get a handle on the whole without looking at all of the very fine details.
No, thanks, Kim. This is your working group. We're just trying to facilitate. So we're listening, and appreciate, that input, they're more than happy to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, don't concentrate, on the 3 hour. That we said that was a tentative schedule if we were going to be done. All these proposals were given in a fuller detail throughout all of our meetings we've had so far. So none of these are new concepts. There is some base for all of those that have been presented. They're in the notes. They're in the presentations that were made. Everything else, they may not be fine-tuned, which is, and our recommendations don't all have to be fine-tuned either. It doesn't have to be that specific, but we do have background information on every proposal that's been submitted, whether it be from, the public or from members here on that. So we do have, at least a base to start with, which is where we're at. Yes, exploring those and looking at those, recommendations to improve the whole system. And that's obviously why we're here. And whatever format works for everybody, that's what we'll organize and that's what we'll do. Yeah.
Martin,
Commissioner.
I would put, the survey under the reporting. If Jenny and Kim want to join Fran and Bill and John, I think that makes sense. Also want to highlight that Dr. Toe did offer to help out with survey. And if we could add him as a surveyor, as a profession, somebody who can add some guidance to that, I would suggest that.
It's Keith here. Just to jump in, I know I've reflected on the difficulty of what the survey situation took for work and the variability and all the pieces that came together or didn't come together this last time around. And as I look ahead, there may be as many acres that are rented, but the rental will be between family entities, not between the older farmers renting to next generation who then are still the older ones still having the land until a transfer happens or a sale for an alternative purpose. So I'm looking from the standpoint of stability and ease to turn around and not have us wrapped up in so much survey things that takes a lot of time and effort. And whether it's every 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, there's still background work that needs to be done and relied upon. We did have on our vote here, I think it's number 24 on the page, the last page of the recommendations here. It was another one of those 50-50 things where there's 7 people voted for 4 or 5, 3, 4 or 5, and 7 people voted number 1 or 2. So we're split on replace the survey evaluation with a formula. And in this case, this formula says soil productivity model. But if you turn around and say, with a formula, then you've got land classifications that we agree should be simplified. And so if those are simplified from 8 to 5, then you've got those base rates that you put on. And then you go back to number 15 that says implement a annual growth cap. And if a growth cap is put upon a change there, then is that a way to then, I know this doesn't fly with the majority on having a survey based, but that then rolls us ahead on a much simpler valuation process for everybody. And over time, I don't see that the valuations here that we're talking about, if they're very far off of what they were in 2020 and even adjusted for inflation, are going to be a horrendous jump or change. They're going to hurt farmers compared to the multitude of other things financially that hurt farmers even more than taxes. So as long as we stabilize taxes, then that's a big part of my goal here. So that's additional 2 cents and a couple dollar bills.
Thanks, Keith. Bill, did you still have your hand raised for?
No, I just re-raised it, Martin.
Okay, great.
So yeah, I would agree with Keith in the fact that we should pick as a group, we should pick which direction we're trying to head in, because all of these other things are going to either be irrelevant to what we're talking about, or they're going to become more relevant. So if we're going to end up going with looking at rental info, so we can capitalize rental information, then the survey process, reporting, all that becomes very relevant. Then we have to come up with how we're going to, what our surveys are going to look like, how we're going to get information from assessors. But if we are going to be looking at a soil productivity model, right, which I think Damien was a proponent of at our last meeting, because we have the maps available to us, right? So if we are going to go towards that model, then surveys and reporting becomes irrelevant, right? Then we can look to things like mill rate caps, and we can put annual growth caps on there. Then if we determine our model first, then I think everything else after that becomes easy as to where we should focus moving forward. So if we do use the maps that we already currently have, and we say, okay, we're going to take that, the 8 classifications down to 5, and we say, okay, the shades of blue and gray are going to be classified as X, and the shades of pink and orange are going to be classified as Y, and the green shades are going to be classified as Z, right? Then we have 3 classes, and then we move from there and we talk about caps and all those different things. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay. And just note that, the survey-based evaluation with the formula was voted no as a, moving forward, not to say that that's, I know it was just discussed, but it was like that was voted no overall,
Well, I think Keith's point
yeah.
was it was a 7-7 split in terms of for and against. So, I mean, if that's still going to be a topic that's discussed, I think we need to find our model first and then go from there.
No, understand that. Yep. Bonnie? Oh, you're muted, Bonnie. Bonnie, you're muted.
I apologize. I just think that as we're looking at the work that we've done previously, we've got the yeses, we've got the nos, and we've got the in the middle. I think we just really need to focus on what are the yeses. And if I'm looking back on it, it's, we know that the survey was a challenge this past time, but we also know that allowing people to provide input is going to be really necessary, because if we're going to look at, doing it by soils based, there's a whole lot of people out there that are using prime and important soils, but not getting a high value crop off of it. That's the way that they have chosen to farm. And so to say that just because you have a high value soil, we're going to charge you more, even though that's not what you're farming for. I think we need to let that move along and not focus on it. But I really want to come back to the fact that the system has worked fairly well until this year. And the survey was the big challenge. Excuse me. And I just think that we need to come back to, again, I'm gonna channel Jenny. Here's the original intent of what we need to do. And so let's focus on that. And for those that want to go off and look at all the other challenges that we're facing, that's fine. That's for another opportunity to really grab on the momentum of this committee. But I think this committee is tasked with getting back on track with 490 assessment. And so what did our vote count for when we took it? And Martin, we started the meeting with it. So let's go back and take a look at some of those things and really, really dial in on the yeses so that we know where we can jump from the easiest.
Thanks, Bonnie. Fran?
Yes, I don't know how to use that hand thing either.
That's okay.
So, but I am hearing a lot. Kim, Jenny, Bill, Bonnie. I'm seeing that, and I agree with them. We need to meet again. We need to hash these things out in person before we break it down to these little subgroups, is my thought. I think we're too wide right now. We got to narrow it down some more. Just my thoughts here.
Perfectly fine. Nope. Thank you, Fran. And we can spend the next, on the 23rd, we have a meeting scheduled for that morning. We can extend it. And if that's the wish of the group, and make it, a 3-hour meeting or whatever time, we want it to make it, and literally go through all the recommendations that we said yes to, and kind of just start going through each one of those. Perhaps start with the valuation side has been noted. go through those, figure out, which ones, because obviously the reporting, is going to be based upon whatever one, recommendation we're going to look forward, spend some time looking, and this I'm just going from what I'm hearing, spend some time going about ways to improve the current process, spend part of the meeting just doing that, to increase that data, and possibly, those that are, going to work reporting and data can come up with some suggestions for that next meeting, and kind of do that as our next meeting process, if that's kind of what I'm hearing from, sorry for the noise out in the background here. Wasn't my motorcycle. So, I mean, that's what I'm kind of hearing from people. So I'm just want to, see if that's, the overall, feeling for kind of a next step. Anyone else? Okay. I assume then that sounds good for everybody.
I think it's good. I like that idea.
Okay.
Next meeting, trying to hash out a good direction.
Yeah.
Can we start with the yeses that we voted on, please?
Oh, you mean at the next meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. No, that's where we would start. Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in agreement, saying that we'd start with those, all those that we voted yes on, but I would probably start with the valuation side first, because then it will fall into the others, as was mentioned about like reporting. Well, you don't know what reporting unless you know what your valuation side is going to be. Right. Other
Martin,
thoughts? Yeah.
Could you just reiterate when you did the yes and the no, was that doing a mathematical calculation of that, or how did you
yeah, it was just
arrive?
literally, it's just math. If you take, the middle was kind of left out because that was the neutral. And so we took the top two or the bottom two and added them together and saw which was the difference there for which got the most votes.
Okay. As opposed to any other mathematical extraction
Simple
of
math.
the ranking part of it. Okay.
Simple math.
Right. I mean, it could.
There's probably all kinds of mathematical ways to do it that you wanted to, because we looked at, do we want to do average? Do we want to do, all this stuff? But an average wasn't going to give us, votes. It's like, what was the average number here? I mean, there's a number of ways to do it, but we wanted to count everybody's vote and show where the votes were. So that's why we did it that way.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. Of course, anyone that's in the math industry or knows numbers, you can make numbers say whatever you want them to say. And that wasn't the intent. That was just, we just did it mathematically simple as possible. Okay. I don't have other stuff on this because it sounds that we have a direction for us for our next meeting is to, start at 9:30. It's a 3-hour time frame, fine for everyone. We add an additional hour onto the meeting, so 9:30 to 12:30. Okay. And
Yes.
obviously, we'll, obviously whatever other meetings we need, we'll continue to have. So we'll plan that, and it'll be in person on that. And we'll start off going through, the yes recommendation, starting with evaluation and going to the reporting, and then the land. On that, we'll also spend some time going through ways to improve current process. And I'd ask, that, as we've kind of just said, that people put things together, Jenny and Kim, I know you've offered that, and John, and Bill, on reporting and data collection, everything, any, additional comments on those type of pieces, will be helpful. We'll spend some time, doing that as well, for that. Ben.
Yeah, I just, as we go here, I'm always nervous about a body taking on a little more life than it needs to. And I think that there's been some comments today to addressing that. And I'd really like to see us, in the spirit of what some other people have already said, be focused on what our charge is and not let this expand. And let us remember also that this law has worked very well for us in terms of keeping values in a place that served our agriculture. We don't have to prove that. We've already got that. Now it's a matter of just getting back to let the valuation system that actually worked very well for us and did a lot of the things that were nuances are built into that a lot of these other methods try to capture. But we already have that. And so I think that, if we stay focused on what the issue was, which is basically that nobody participated in the survey, that we can get where we need to get to in a relatively expedient way.
But that wasn't the only issue, remember. The other issue was how the results were analyzed, and the potential issue with just using rental values. So it wasn't just a lack of participation.
Well, it was. I mean, if you remember, I'm going to take a little, acceptance to that because, as that was presented to us in that meeting, between UConn and Farm Credit, they basically had no numbers to work with, and that's what they focused on. This is we cannot make this this work with three values.
But that's not true. They did have numbers to work with. They ignored the zero values in the analysis. The other dynamic was people weren't allowed to. I did my own analysis of the process. People weren't allowed to report rental values unless they were identifying as renting land. So anybody who used land without paying money might have said, well, I don't rent land, I just use my neighbor's land. And if they did that, they weren't allowed to fill out the rest of the farm part of the survey. So it wasn't just farmers not responding.
But that becomes a reporting issue. That's pretty easily fixed with what was already discussed here today.
But also an analysis issue if you ignore all the zeros.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try to stay, one person to talk instead of let's try not to go back and forth, just so we can kind of keep everyone and get their opportunity to speak. Ben, you want to finish up?
Well, there's the challenge. I think that exactly what we need to address is that, okay, so you have participants that aren't counted. That's something that we can address. If you have, getting more people to participate, that's also something. My recollection was that there weren't a whole lot of zero values that were, but that's just a recollection. That's something we have to go back and visit in a little more detail. And it's certainly important. But the focus being on getting enough information so that the valuation models can work as they have traditionally over the last 5 decades.
Thank you, Ben. Paul and then Bill.
Well, I just wanted to say I agree with most of what Ben just said. That this Public Act 490 has served us well for many years, so we don't necessarily have to start from the ground up and reinvent the whole thing. But obviously, there was problems last time, and that's what we need to address and come up with a better way of valuing the property. Just a housekeeping thing, though, is regarding the next meeting. If we're adding an hour, which I'm fine with, but could we consider moving it up to a 9 o'clock start? Would that work for people in the group instead of waiting till 9:30?
It's fine on my side. For us, I can't. Obviously, anyone have a problem with that? If we started at 9, go 9 to 12. Getting a couple hand raise or thumbs up and everything. So I get that looks fine. Thanks, Paul.
Just Amanda, can you check the room and make sure it's available from 9 to 12? I know we usually book it from 9, but I'm not sure what if there's somebody that's got it after us.
No.
Not a problem.
Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner. Bill?
So I just wanted to hop in on the zeros just for a second. The zeros have always been there. Right. So but at the crux of what we're doing or what UConn is doing and what they're doing is they're capitalizing net rental data. Right. So a zero, you can't capitalize a zero. Right. So the zeros have always been there, probably 40 and 50 years ago as well. And those were discounted at that time also because you can't. So what the survey is doing is they're trying to find average rental info for particular areas so that they can capitalize it. That's how we value any income producing property, whether it be land or buildings. So a zero can't be used in the computation. So I've heard that said at a couple different meetings. And I just wanted to clarify that a zero can't be used. right? It can be looked at so that we can get a certain percentage of how many farms are renting with zero income. And that can be used as kind of an aggregate data piece, but you can't capitalize a zero net rental income. So, I mean, that's just, I just wanted to offer that as a point of clarification that those zeros have always been there.
Thanks, Bill. Joe and then Kim. You there, Joe?
Yep. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
Finding my mute button. I just want to
That's
push
okay.
back on that because you can factor in the zeros because you're capitalizing the average rentals. They're not capitalizing each individual farm. So if you ignore the zeros, your average is ignoring all of those values. And to say that you can't capitalize a zero, fine, but you can capitalize 10 zeros plus a 2 plus a 5. You can capitalize that average. Just how it's done. And so if there are more zeros now than there were in the past, and my recollection is there was something like 70 respondents who said that they rent land but then didn't have rental value, but I'm not at my computer, so I don't have it. But it was a lot of people. And we don't know how many people weren't able to get through the survey. So if you're looking at Connecticut, where farmers are not paying as much to rent land or possibly not paying anything to use another's farmland, possibly because of the success of PA 490, people saying, hey, I want a farmer to use my land. The rental values become really problematic when that is the only thing that's used, especially in areas where people aren't renting farmland. Not every part of the state has farmland rentals. So, and the other thing I'll push back on that survey that was conducted, there were a number of other issues that we should not ignore. One of them was that they just averaged parcels. That's why swampland went so crazy, because people reported renting their rental values on a parcel of land. So like the swampland value was based on one report of a farmer who reported renting or having their land rented for one parcel that was part tillable land and part swampland, and they averaged the lease value across the swampland and the tillable. So there's some real problems on this because the rental reporting is done by parcel, and often rentals are by parcel, not by the acreage of land classification. I'm not saying we don't collect data. I'm not saying we don't do a survey, but if we're going to revisit this and recommend that, we need to be really knowledgeable about what went wrong this year. And I think even in 2020, there were some signs that this was starting to go bad if you look at how some of the land classifications jumped at that time.
Thanks, Joe. Kim?
Yeah, thank you. I figured out how to raise my hand. Finally. Yeah, I think figuring out what the modern data points are, right? You know, back in 1964, whenever the lease land rates became the measure of how we looked at farmland, certainly worth looking at again. And I 100% agree with what Joe is saying, because ultimately PA 490 is we are valuing the land based on the use and not based on market value. What happened in this case was the zeros were thrown out and it became clear that the appraisal was done based on market value. That was the conversation started with, several meetings ago when we heard from the appraisal from Credit East, which was land value has gone up in value. And so it's really important. And then when you also, I think the other thing too, to look at, and I think having several data points will help with this, is that the accuracy of what some of that land looked actually was leasing for the category of land. And this goes back to the point that Bonnie made earlier about soil types and basing the amount on a higher, tillable soil type doesn't mean that your yields are going to be, commensurate with what that value is. And in the case of these survey results, one stood out to me, which was a lease for $39,996 for 99 acres, of which 69 acres were usable they were growing hay. I find it very hard to believe that someone was leasing 69 acres of pasture F to grow hay and spending $40,000 for it. So it's also, I think, important to start looking at what's going on there. You know, what are people reporting on, and making sure that it's a real measure. And as a result, that I think skewed that the end result of what the appraisal came in at for that land category.
Thanks, Kim. Jenny, then Ella, then Bill.
I won't belabor this point any further, but I just feel it's important. Bill, I hear what you're saying, that it might not fit neatly into the calculation side of things, but I can tell you personally, so anecdotal data, that we no longer engage in leases on our farm that require a financial input because we simply can't afford to do it. So if we actually had authentic data over time, I would bet my farm almost on it to say that we have more farms who are engaging now in $0 leases than they ever have. So while we may have always had zeros in the equation, we may have only been throwing out 10 in 1990, but we're throwing out 200 and these are made up numbers, please. We are throwing out 200 in 2025, right? So that's my point, is that we can't ignore the zero. We have to figure out what to do with it and how to include it in the mathematics side of things, and how do we include it in the survey. That was all I was going to say.
Thanks, Jenny. I know, Ella, you had your hand up.
Oh, it's more of the same as what everyone else was saying. So yeah, I get the cap rates point, but then let's figure out something else.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
So yeah, so I guess food for thought for our next meeting. So, and just hearing you guys talk, maybe we look at recommending that they use the median value, let's say, right? Because if you throw 200 zeros into a pot and then you're trying to come up with an average, obviously 200 zeros will bring down your average. That's why I, as an assessor and assessments in general, we don't like to use averages, right? Because averages includes both the highs and the lows, and it gives them equal weight. So if we look at, say, the median value moving forward, then that's the true middle of the road of a data point or a data set. So maybe just food for thought as we're kind of kicking this around over the next 3 weeks, when we come back to discuss, instead of, using words like average, when it's going to be skewed by a even larger number of zeros than there were in the past, maybe we look at the middle of the road. That's it.
Thanks, Bill. It's good information. Okay. Anyone else?
Yep, Keith here. Again, just looking at the realistic endpoint of financially affordable taxes and what those net pieces of it is. And if you look at the average Connecticut mill rate of 27 and a farm acre assessed at $1,000, that's $27 of taxes a year. Forget about the 70% and the ratios on that part of it. You take it, if it's $2,000 and it's more productive, then that's, $54, average a year. To me, that rate per acre is super affordable for most people, what they're doing on it, whether they're raising tobacco or whether they're just, paying it, or somebody has, got a $0 lease and they're getting it for nothing, and the landowner's glad to have and pay that type of tax. So I think we're overblowing some of the things of getting statistical information when our bottom line is that we're still in the realm of that range that we're expecting to come out with to be affordable. And it's just a few cups of coffee that we're dealing with differences. So I don't want to blow it way out of proportion again, and how far we take and go. And with that said, just a housekeeping matter, unfortunately, I'll be flying in the air back home during our next meeting, so I won't have a chance to be with you next time, but I'll listen to the recording the next day.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Okay. Just to move on, so recap, June 23rd, we'll verify the time of that. Once we get that, we'll send, make sure everyone's got that, but we'll anticipate a 9 a.m. start in person meeting. We'll keep the July 14th as a regular meeting as well, because obviously we'll probably need a couple of meetings to finalize after we go through the next meeting here on it. And as we said, we'll go through some of, what we said, we'll go through all the yes recommendations that we have. We'll go through current process, some of those concepts there that we've discussed about at the next meeting, and more of kind of, just a big forum, in person to do that. The only comments we received are included in the packet was from Representative Doug Dubitsky. He had attended the last meeting for those that were there and made a couple of comments. He just followed up with his thoughts. So those are in your packet at the end of the meeting agenda packet. So you can read those. We did not have anyone today sign up to make public comment. So with that, Commissioner, any remarks that you want to make before we adjourn until we meet again?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I thank everyone. Productive meeting, good input from everybody as always. We'll get all of this, together, so you'll have it in advance to review and start thinking about, all those that have been voted yes, think about current process, so that way we're ready to move forward at the next meeting and have a good, vibrant discussion on each of the individual topics. And with that, we'll adjourn at 2:32 p.m. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Well.